Okay, we've got a size 16 scud hook here in the vise. You can see I've got it tilted downwards. We're going to put a dubbing loop on this at the very end. And so I want it face downward until I get that dubbing loop in place. Otherwise this thread will just slide all over on me. I'm using a Nanosilk here, which is what you're going to want to use, because we're going to dub pretty tight with our dubbing loop. I'm going to go down a little ways here, then we'll just go ahead and cut off that excess, and then I'll just go ahead and finish those turns moving down. I'm using a red Nanosilk here, but really you can use about any color you would like because it's all going to be covered up other than the head. So I don't want to go too deep, so that's probably going to be deep enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and just travel back up and lay myself a thread base, leaving an eye length or so behind the eye of the hook. Then we're going to just go ahead and travel right back down. And this is what is called a Gooey Scud, or something like that. Very easy scud pattern, very effective scud pattern. So I've got my thread and my tool for doing a dubbing loop. I'm just going to take this wrap around. I'm going to wrap a couple of times around the base. From there I'll turn this right back upright. And I'm just going to tie that loop back to where I want the body to start on this scud pattern. Once I have that in place, I'm going to go ahead and let my dubbing loop kind of dangle for a second while I move my thread back up towards the front of the fly here. Just like that. Now with that dubbing loop in place, my thread at the front, I'm going to go ahead and reposition that hook. I'm just going to pivot it upwards a little bit so I'm more parallel to this work surface here. For dubbing, I'm just going to go ahead and use this UV caddis nymphs dubbing. Anything that's really got a lot of guard hairs in it and will poke out, we're going to make a mess here, an absolute mess, and that's exactly what we want to do. For me, I am mixing a gray color, heavier with the gray, a tiny little bit of more of an amber color, and just even smaller amount of red color, and that's going to create more of a rainbow dubbing, which is what I use a lot on the rivers here. But you can change up the color of the dubbing based on what you are fishing in your local waters. You can also find other dubbing. Just make sure that it is very coarse, has a lot of guard hairs in it. Once you kind of got that laid out here, we're going to go ahead and grab our dubbing loop. We'll hold it open and we'll sink this dubbing right into that loop. Some of it might fight you a little bit more than other bits, but if you're patient, you can get them in there. So I kind of have them squeezed in a little bit and hold that straight up. Give me a chance to kind of move this down just a little bit, just to create a more cohesive dubbing noodle here. So here we are with our dubbing trapped inside of our dubbing loop. Now I'm going to take my dubbing loop and I'm just going to start spinning it, and I want to spin it pretty tight. And that's one of the reasons you want to use Nanosilk here, is because it's really tough. Other threads, if you wind them too tight, are just going to break up on you. Plus we're going to be doing some really close trimming here, and this Nanosilk will dig in pretty deep and keep you from cutting it. So from here I've got a nice loop going, but we're going to even puff it up more. I'm just going to grab a little Velcro brush here and just kind of tap, and what it's going to do when I tap on this dubbing on the sides, on the bottom, is it's going to create, as you can see, even more of a fuzzy dubbing loop here. So now I'm just going to use my rotary, Make sure I get a couple of good wraps with a lot of fuzz on them back at this back area. This is a really easy place to skimp, and I don't want to skimp. Make sure you're getting around that hook point so it doesn't cut your thread. Nanosilk is strong, but not strong enough that I want to mess around with that. And as we move up, we're going to take really touching turns. We really want just a absolute hairy mess of a body here. And that's why we use a dubbing that's got a lot of guard hairs in it. It'll stick out quite a bit. Just take your time and make sure you're taking these wraps one in front of the other, because we want this thickness to go all the way up to behind the eye of the hook. Even going over a previous wrap is just fine. Now we're getting into some of the thicker dubbing, which is fine. Most of this is just going to be trimmed back or pulled down. So even though it looks like a complete mess, we're gonna land it, famously. So let's just keep this going all the way up here to where we kind of left our thread off. Continuing to take those touching wraps so we're building up that nasty mess as we move up. Right about there should be good for me. I'm going to go ahead and move my bobbin cradle out of the way, and we'll go ahead down and tighten down or lock down our dubbing loop here. I'm just going to tie over the top of it with a wrap or two. I'm going to take a wrap or two over the other side of it closer to the eye of the hook. And from there we can go ahead and remove our dubbing loop. So I'm just going to kind of hold that sideways so I can access it. Once I've got that all tied off, I'm going to stroke these fibers back to try to create a clean space as much as I can behind the eye of the hook here. So I'm just going to kind of stroke those fibers back, trying not to catch too many. I always end up catching one or two. And from here we're just going to go ahead and whip finish this. Always when you're whip finishing, you can do some wraps up behind the eye, but the bulk of them you want to move them backwards to create a thicker back end to the head that we're developing here. From here we'll just go ahead and grab our thread cutter. So to continue on with our fluffy, fuzzy scud here, I'm actually going to grab a dubbing brush here, and I'm going to tease out even more, especially at the back here where we got fewer wraps in. With that, I'm going to start to stroke all of these fibers down. And as I do that, I'm going to keep hold of them. I'm going to try to trim some of the top off. This again is where that Nanosilk is helpful, because it's going to be resting so deep in this dubbing that your chances of cutting it off are pretty slim. From here, I'm just going to kind of go around. I'm going to look at the sides. I want that bulk of this material pointing down under the hook, so I'm going to turn my vise to the side and just clip out a few of those areas that are not contributing to what will be the legs of our sow bug here. I'll do that on both sides. I'm turning my vise a bit, so hopefully you can see it. So next comes the gooey part. I'm going to put some UV resin. I'm going to work on coating this all the way back down to the base here. And this is just going to be our first go. It's going to help us establish that base. I like using more of a medium viscosity of UV here, and it's not a bad idea to turn it upside down. I don't need to do that right now because I really just didn't put a lot on there yet. So we'll go ahead and cure that. Next we'll come on in with our second coat. You want to make sure this is going all the way down to the base of the scud here. As well as catching those thread wraps. I'm going to go ahead and turn this upside down now because I just don't want that UV resin to seep into the legs of our scud. So I'm just going to go ahead and UV cure this with my light. So now we're going to go ahead and add our final coat here. I do like to have a nice bulbous top here, but I want it to blend in, so I'm going to let it kind of sneak down here around the side. I'm going to look at it from side to side to make sure it looks fairly even. Make sure I've got some of the material over my thread wraps here at the front. Come back and look for anywhere I might have some dips. Go ahead, turn this upside down one more time. Hit it with our light one more time. From here, we're just going to do a little bit of trimming and try to keep those legs shorter than the hook point. Make sure you take a look on both sides because there are always some that are hiding from you. With that, you've got your Gooey Scud. It's a wonderful pattern, very easy to tie actually. It'll hunt, it'll catch fish. Like I said, use whatever color of dubbing works in your general area. Be patient with the UV and make a few coats with it. Notice that we don't have scud back or anything else covering the top. We've simply got the UV resin. So it makes for a wonderful fly. Grab yourself a hook, throw it in your vise, and give this one a shot.